Now, we've just learned the sad news this morning that Norman Hunter, former Leeds and England legend, great player, has sadly died. The coronavirus, we believe, is the cause of his death. He had an underlying condition, but it's very sad news for all Leeds fans. And for John Giles, Norman was a colleague and a dear friend. John, thank you very much for joining us. This is terrible news for someone you were very close to and went into battle many times with.
Oh yeah, I mean he was. Norman was still at Leeds when I left, and I was there for 12 years. He was just coming on as a lad. I think he was only 19 when I went to Leeds. So we had a long time together. Good times, bad times, but mostly good times.
Yes.
And I have very, very fond memories of Norman as a player, but certainly as an individual. He was one of the good guys. I mean,
yes, he was
really good lads.
76 when he passed away overnight. Born in Gateshead, which is in the north of England. Geordies, I think, he's a good. They're good people, salt of the earth people, John. Very, very honest, straight. What you see is what you get.
Well, yeah, and he played that way, Eamon. I never heard him moan. He actually loved playing, and what made him, one of the things that made him such a terrific player was that attitude.
Yes.
It is with all the top players. He loved it. I think he obviously came from a working class background, and when he was at Leeds, there was a manager called Jack Taylor at that particular time. Didn't sign him, Eamon.
Yeah,
he let him go.
He joined Leeds at the age of 16, and you were telling me before we began that when you went there, or shortly afterwards, when Don Revie went there, in fact, he was about to be let go.
No, he let him go. Jack Taylor let him. Don Revie was a player at that time.
Right.
Right, and Jack Taylor was the manager, and Jack Taylor made the decision at the end of the season to let him go, right, and then Don took over as manager and brought him back.
Right, yeah.
So it was a big, this like at 17 with young lads, when they're released, you're in a bad position,
Yes.
But Don brought him back, but he had this work ethic, I think, anyway. Obviously that increased the work ethic, because he knew this was a big break to get back and be signed by Leeds United, a professional club. But did he work at it? I mean, he was a great worker, never any trouble on the pitch. In training, the same effort.
Yes.
We used to have to hold them back sometimes. When we played a match, for example, we'd lose a goal. And on the Monday, Les Cocker used to take the training and go over the goal. And Les was very good, but he was inclined to go on a bit,
Yes.
And we used to say, no, Norman, when we get out there, let Les have his say, and then we get on with the five-a-side.
Yeah.
And Norman couldn't do it.
Yes. Yeah.
No, Les.
Yeah.
I think if I'd have been over there we could go on for half an hour, 3/4 of an hour.
Yes. Yeah.
With the lad saying, Norman, but he couldn't help himself. He just had to do it. Training-wise, all the various things, because he always regarded himself as a non-gifted lad, if that's the right way.
Yes.
In other words, it was hard work. Of course he could play. He became a great player. And people say, about Norman, bite your legs and that. But I know playing with him, if I was 40 yards away from him and he got on his left foot, you were going to get it, But that's the way he was.
Yeah, I mean, the Norman bite your legs was a reference to his no-nonsense tackling, and we might get into that in a bit more detail in a moment. You were a bit of a no-nonsense tackler yourself, but just the origins of that Norman bite your legs became a great sort of slogan in English football. It originated with Leeds fans when they held up a banner in before the 1972 FA Cup final when you played Arsenal, and the Leeds fans affectionately, Norman bite your legs. Now tell me, he formed a great partnership with Jack Charlton in the Leeds side, and it was a great side, and he was really a fantastic defender, wasn't he?
he was the best defender I played with, Eamon, by a long way. And he had this particular thing in his physical makeup, Eamon, that when when you play, when I play, there's certain things that you go past the player and you can judge the distance.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Norman had this extra stretch. I don't know where it was. I never saw it before. On his left side.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
Even in practice, when I was practicing, I'm past him here. Next thing, his left foot would come out and hook it back again.
Yes.
It was just an extraordinary thing that he had in the physical sense. But read the game well, obviously, and could play. He wasn't particularly quick, but read it well and tackled, but always went for the ball. I know he was a hard tackler and he could dish it out all right, but generally, he was a good tackler. Saw the ball, went for the ball.
Yeah.
But he was so enthusiastic in every game that he played, which was great. But could really play. I mean, if he went on an overlap, for example, he could get a good cross in if he were near somebody, and he was a great attitude.
Yes, I mean, you could see his concentration. I mean, he had that slightly hunched look.
Yes.
And slightly hunched and bent. But it was real concentration, deep concentration for every second of every match.
Every game and every training session, Eamon.
Yes.
Like he like when he was playing, if there was a goal scored against us, it somehow or other he'd say, I could have done something about that. I could have got over there. I could have done that. And he wasn't really, he wasn't at fault at all.
No.
But he now, you played with players that say, it wasn't my fault. I was doing this or doing that. He'd always take it, and that's the way he was. But he could play a goal in the overlaps. He could play. And he was, and Don loved him. Don Revie loved him, Eamon.
Yes.
He loved him. Well, any manager would love him because he just gave him. And he played with injuries and all sorts of things, But we used to have on a Tuesday, we had no midweek match. We used to have a game of golf. And he was always partnered Don Revie himself against me and Peter Lorimer.
Yeah.
On Monday, and he loved Norman. Yeah. We used to call him his son,
Yes.
And he'd come into the dressing room, Don, and he'd say, right, son, are we ready for tomorrow?
Yeah.
And when Don would go out, of course, we'd say, "Oh, your dad is looking after you again, Norman." And he hated it.
Yeah.
He hated it. He said, "I wish he'd leave me alone. I wish he wouldn't do that." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's the way. But if you were a manager, you would love him.
Of course.
Every match it was the same effort, same performance. He was great.
Now he was interestingly in the context of how you describe his character and his application to the game. He was the first player to win the PFA Player of the Year award. This is the players' choice, the Players' Player of the Award. He won it in 1974. He was the first. He was also included in the Football League. They brought out a list of 100 legends who played the English game, and he was one of them. And as you say, come from a working class background, Gateshead, which is up on the far north of England, the quintessential Englishman, really, in many ways. And they, the virtues of people like that, honesty, loyalty, diligence, very, very important things that people like Norman have.
Yeah, definitely, Eamon, because we had, if you go back on the history of the game in many ways, it was usually a lot of solid English lads like that.
Yes.
And then you had the Scottish-Irish element in it.
Yes.
Which were inclined to be a little bit more creative, if you know what I mean. And I don't mean that in a bad way, obviously, at all.
More flamboyant, John.
Yes. Like in the Leeds makeup, we had Jack, Paul Madeley, Terry Cooper, terrific players. But we also had Billy, Eddie Gray, myself, Peter Lorimer. And if you look back at the great teams, like when you look back at, say, the Spurs team that won the double in the 60s, Eamon.
Yes.
There are a few English lads, but they Danny Blanchflower, Dave Mackay, John White.
Cliff Jones, who was a Welshman.
Cliff Jones, yeah. Yep. There was that mixture, and we had that. And Norman was the quintessential, if that's the right word,
yes.
Englishman in that particular setup where you needed that type of individual that was going to give it to you all the time and give his best and play in the same way. And we had a mixture of that with Paul Reaney, Paul Madeley, Jack Charlton, Norman Hunter. And Norman stood out probably more than anybody else in that particular way.
Yes, and he formed a great partnership with Jack Charlton, Big Jack. Now, he got, I think, for England, he had 28 caps for England. But, of course, Jack had formed another great partnership in the England team that won the World Cup, and that was with the great Bobby Moore. So, in that sense, Norman was unfortunate because I think you believe, as I do, that Bobby Moore was one of the greatest players ever to play the game.
He was, Eamon. The bigger the occasion for Bobby, the better he played.
Yes.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like if he played at Wembley in '66, that I think raised his concentration and all the various things. And looking at him now, to be honest, if it was international football, I would pick Bobby Moore.
Yes.
Week in and week out, I'd pick Norman Hunter.
Yes, because Bobby was playing for West Ham, who were a bit of a pub team.
Well, they were never going to win anything.
No,
I remember Bobby say coming to Leeds and. He'd play well. Bobby would play well, but there wouldn't be the drive and the passion. I think he always knew they were never going to win the league.
No.
Whereas Norman had that week in and week out. So if I was picking anybody week in and week out, I'd go with Norman, definitely.
Yes.
If I was picking any for the big occasion like the World Cup, Bobby Moore.
Yes.
But Norman never held any resentment against Bobby Moore. He said, Bobby Moore's a great player.
Yes.
And he recognised he was a great player. There was no jealousy or saying, I should be in the England team. He was just that type of lad. But definitely week in and week out, I'd pick Norman. Big matches, Bobby Moore.
When was the last time you saw him, John?
I saw him at... sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We had the centenary. It was Leeds centenary year.
Yes.
And we had a do in I think early December, and then we had the Lord Mayor do where the group of players were given the freedom of Leeds.
Ah, yes.
So
of course,
I saw him at that do, and actually we went out and had with a few of the lads. Terry Cooper was over for it.
Yeah.
To have a little drink afterwards.
Yeah.
But that's the last time I saw him.
He liked a beer. But not in the big way, not the way Billy. Not the way Billy would like it.
No. He'd be the total opposite to Billy.
Yeah.
Billy gets drunk on a packet of wine gums, Eamon.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, would lose the head a bit.
Yes.
Norman would. Norman wasn't a drinker at all. It was like when we were away, like as lads together. There was sometimes after a good win, we would have a few drinks. And we'd have a bit of a sing-song.
Yes.
Billy, of course, could sing.
Yeah.
Eddie could give a bit of a number. Peter Lorimer could give a bit of a number.
And you could do a concert.
Yeah. Norman would nearly die.
Yes.
Before he'd sing a song, or could sing a song. And Paul Madeley the same, and all the English lads were the same.
Well, they are. The English guys and English people, they don't know about sing-songs at all.
No, they're not into it. Now, Norman would enjoy a sing-song. But if you asked him, say, come on, Norman, give us a number. He'd die, Eamon, you know, but he'd enjoy it, you know. He had a good sense of humour in that. But he was a steady lad. He wasn't a drinker at all. Looking back, I don't ever remember seeing him drunk.
Now, he had a fabulous career. I mean, he played 726 games in total for Leeds, I believe. But he certainly... he played 540 times for the first team. He then went on and he played for Bristol City for a couple of seasons. And then he was at Barnsley for a while. And then he went into management. He got promotion, John, with Barnsley. Which is always, of course, fatal, isn't it? If you're at these small clubs and you get promotion, that's you gone, because you're not going to get any money from the chairman in those days to improve your team. And then he got the sack after, I think he's 4 seasons at Barnsley, and then a couple of seasons at Rotherham and a season at Bradford City. But he still, I mean, he was such a respected and loved figure in the game, certainly in the part of England, in the Yorkshire part of England, that he worked a bit for the BBC. I want to ask you, though, about another aspect of his career and his life was the Leeds team you played for were for a long time a team that was disliked. I mean, you won people around a bit in the end, but generally that Leeds team was disliked. And he in particular came to almost symbolise it. It was a very unfair caricature, but the toughness, the unyielding determination, the dourness that was the Leeds image, if not the reality, when you consider the great players you had. Norman came to embody that almost, didn't he? In the popular prints.
Yeah. Well, the prints are always looking for something like that.
Yeah.
But one thing I would say, we weren't unpopular in Leeds.
No.
And certainly Norman Hunter was one of the heroes and legends with the Leeds supporters because of what he did.
Yes.
But I think it was exaggerated, Damon, to be honest, like the dirty Leeds thing. Of course, we were rough. But that was the time that was in it.
Yes.
You know, if you went to Burnley, for example, you had at least 3 or 4 guys. Hardness, O'Neill, a few players that I could mention, different. Tommy Smith, Ron Yates, Ian St. John could look after himself. You go to Chelsea, Chopper Harris, Eddie McCready, Peter Rodgers. Every team did that. The only thing is, we did it better than those teams because we were winning as well.
Yes.
And obviously, outside of, for example, when Leeds played Manchester United in those days, when we first came up the first season, there was no trouble between the supporters.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But we challenged Manchester United.
Yeah.
And we became hated.
Yes.
In Manchester.
Yes.
So any team that's successful is not going to be possible. It's like Liverpool and Manchester United now. They don't exactly like each other.
No.
Because they're rivals to each other. And it was a lot of that was with Leeds. Now, we did do things that we shouldn't have done. We were a bit...
Yes.
Delaying time and that. But every team at that particular time, I mean, you had to commit grievous bodily harm.
Yes.
It was a yellow card, you know.
It was a jungle, John. And I just want finally to reflect on his ability. As I say, he got 28 English caps. Absent Bobby Moore, he would have surely got many, many more.
Yes.
But we look at the players that are playing today and the great central defenders like Virgil van Dijk, for example, and there aren't too many examples. He was right up there as a defender, surely.
Yeah, he was the best defender I ever played with, Eamon, and I think he's one of the best defenders I've ever seen.
Yes.
He was just brilliant. He could read the game well. He wasn't particularly quick. He could read it well. He could tackle well. He could give them, and he could deliver the ball. He was, he'd have no problem on the ball today playing.
Yes.
At all. Like he was a joy to play with, and he was like he'd always take responsibility.
Yeah. As I'm speaking to you now, John, I'm just looking at a nice photograph. It's Norman standing beside Bobby Charlton in 1969. They're at an airport and they're laughing. Bobby's looking very fondly at Norman, who's breaking his heart laughing. Bobby would have loved him too, because Bobby is a superman.
Bobby was the best player I ever played or against. But he would appreciate Norman. Actually, Bobby loved the hard nuts, Eamon.
Yes.
He loved them. He idolised. He couldn't do it himself, Bobby. He couldn't. He couldn't tackle a hot dinner. But he was brought up in Newcastle, where Jimmy Schooler. Do you remember Jimmy Schooler?
I do indeed. Yeah.
Scottish guy. Now this guy was a great player, but he was a really hard nut. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he idolised Jimmy Schooler.
Yes.
Bobby.
Yeah.
Like you think it was Glenn Shackleton or something. Bobby would be Bobby Ciro. No, Schooler.
Yes.
He loved it. He couldn't. Bobby couldn't tackle it. I think Bobby would have loved to been able to tackle. He could do everything else.
Yes.
He was the greatest, best player I ever played with or against. but he would have loved Norman as well.
Yes.
Because Norman had this reputation. He was a hard nut, a great tackler. Probably couldn't do that, but he'd love anybody that played with Norman or came in touch with Norman as a colleague, Eamon, or an opponent, would love what he did as a professional footballer.
Well, we couldn't, and you couldn't pay him a finer tribute than that, John. And I'm very grateful to you for talking to us, to remember your friend and colleague. And sadly, Norman has passed away, and God rest him. May he rest in peace. And we'll talk to you soon, John. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank John. It's obviously a very emotional moment for John, and indeed for the many Leeds fans who still hope that Leeds will come again, and they're top of the championship right now. And when football resumes, there's every chance they will. But I met Norman Hunter on a couple of occasions myself. He was a wonderful man, and may he rest in peace. That's all we have time for. My deep gratitude to John.